Since ancient times, Dharma masters have taught us that the mind is the field where we plant the seeds of our future. Just as a neglected garden produces only weeds, an uncultivated mind becomes fertile ground for suffering and failure. But when we tend to this inner garden with wisdom and dedication, it blossoms with the fruits of peace, harmony, and fulfillment. Our story begins in the misty mountains of the Himalayas, where an ancient monastery stands as a silent sentinel between heaven and earth. It is here that we follow the path of a young monk whose simple yet profound practices set him apart from hundreds of others, not because he seeks recognition or power, but because of the way he inhabits each moment with full awareness, a quality the Buddha called the only way for the purification of beings, for overcoming sorrow and lamentation, for the end of suffering and distress, for entering the right path and realizing nirvana. The first light of morning was still only a promise on the horizon when the sound of the wooden bell reverberated through the monastery corridors. As the darkness slowly receded, silhouettes of monks emerged from their quarters, moving like drowsy shadows toward the meditation hall. Their dragging footsteps and half-closed eyes revealed minds still caught between sleep and wakefulness, bodies present, but awareness scattered. Among them walked a young monk with an upright posture and a steady step. There was no sluggishness in him. Every step was taken with deliberate awareness, as if the simple act of walking were a sacred ceremony. While the others moved out of habit, he seemed to dance with existence itself. The old master, observing from the courtyard, smiled as he noticed the difference. For 3 years, he had watched the growth of this young monk and saw in him something rare, the ability to turn routine into revelation. After the morning meditation, the monks received their daily tasks. The young monk was assigned to sweep the central courtyard, a job considered mundane and repetitive. As the others dispersed to their duties, the master remained discreetly observing. The first rays of sunlight now touched the courtyard stones, revealing dry leaves and dust carried by the night wind. The young monk gazed at the area for a moment, like a painter contemplating a blank canvas. Then, with a slight smile, he picked up the bamboo broom and began. It was extraordinary how something so common could seem so extraordinary. While other monks assigned to similar tasks swept hurriedly, chatting or letting their minds wander to future concerns, this young monk transformed the act of sweeping into a form of moving meditation. Each movement of the broom was complete in itself. His right hand held the handle firmly but without tension, while his left rested lightly further down. His feet moved in harmony with the broom body and tool, becoming a natural extension of each other. There was no rush, no reluctance, only the present moment manifesting through his hands. A rebellious leaf, carried by a sudden gust of wind, landed in a freshly swept corner. 2 novice monks passing by chuckled at the small irony work undone. But the young monk simply observed the leaf with curiosity, as if it were the first time he had ever seen such a thing. He walked up to it with the same attentiveness he had given to the entire process, picked it up gently, and continued his work. The master, seeing this, called all the monks nearby. As a small group gathered, he pointed to the young monk, who remained absorbed in his task, seemingly unaware of the audience now watching him. "Look closely," the master said, his voice calm yet penetrating. "This is the living teaching of the Satipatthana Sutra. When sweeping, know that you are sweeping. Many of you recite these words daily, but this young monk embodies them." An older monk interrupted, his voice betraying slight impatience. "But master, it is just sweeping. We all sweep." The master smiled. "Yes, you all sweep, but observe the difference. Your bodies sweep while your minds are elsewhere. You are so preoccupied with what you will do next that you miss the only moment that truly exists, the now." He paused, watching as understanding began to awaken in the faces around him. Buddha taught that mindfulness is like a guardian watching over the gates of the mind. When this guardian is alert, Nothing enters or leaves unnoticed. No thought, no emotion, no sensation passes by without awareness. This constant vigilance is the first secret of this young monk. The group watched for a few more moments. The young monk had finished sweeping one section and was now moving to another with the same quality of presence. There was no distinction between important and less important areas of the courtyard. Every inch received equal attention. Notice how he is not just cleaning the courtyard, the master continued. He is clearing his own mind. Every movement of the broom is also a movement of inner clarity. This is the true practice. An old story tells that someone once asked the Buddha how he and his disciples practiced. He replied, "We walk, we stand, we sit, we lie down, we eat, we drink, and we speak, paying attention to everything we do. This is our practice." The listener was disappointed and said, "But everyone does these things. What is the difference?" To which the Buddha replied, "The difference is that when we walk, we know we are walking. When we stand, we know we are standing." The difference seems subtle, the master said, but it is as deep as the ocean. This young monk does not divide life into important and disposable moments. To him, sweeping the courtyard is no less sacred than meditating before the Buddha statue. He has understood that every moment is an opportunity to awaken. Just then, the wind blew stronger, scattering a new layer of leaves across the freshly swept courtyard. The younger monk sighed, anticipating the frustration such a setback would cause. To their surprise, the young monk simply smiled, as if this were precisely the lesson the universe wished to teach at that moment. See how he receives what many would consider a setback, the master pointed out. No irritation, no frustration, only acceptance and continuation. This, too, is mindfulness, seeing things as they truly are, without adding our own projections and preferences. By now, the sun shone fully upon the monastery, bathing the courtyard in golden light. Shadows shortened, and the day gained strength. The monks were expected to move on to their next tasks, yet they remained absorbed in the silent demonstration of wisdom they were witnessing. A mind trained in mindfulness, the master concluded, is like purified water resting in a serene lake. When it is undisturbed by desire, aversion, or distraction, it reflects reality with perfect clarity. And this clarity, my friends, is the true foundation of any success, whether worldly or spiritual. The young monk continued his work, sweeping the new leaves with the same serenity and precision. To the keen observers, it became clear that he was not merely cleaning the courtyard. He was cultivating the garden of his mind, preparing the soil for seeds of wisdom and realization that would inevitably sprout. As the group dispersed to resume their own tasks, many walked with more mindful steps, inspired by the silent example they had witnessed. The master knew that some of these seeds would fall on fertile ground, others on rocky soil. Some would sprout immediately, others would take entire seasons. When the courtyard was finally clean, the young monk walked to the well to wash his hands. A bowl of fresh water awaited him. As he dipped his hands into the crystal clear water, he noticed how each drop seemed to contain the entire sky. Even in this simple act of washing his hands, his mind remained clear and attentive. As he watched the reflections dancing on the water's surface, a critical thought arose in his mind. As he observed the reflections in the water. "You've wasted too much time on this simple task. The others have already moved on to the next activity." It was a familiar voice, the inner judge that had accompanied him for so long. But instead of being swept away by the current of this thought, the young monk simply noticed it. He observed its arising, much like one watches a cloud appear in the sky. He did not resist it, did not identify with it, nor did he feed it with more thoughts. He merely witnessed its presence. Interesting, he thought, how the mind produces judgments uninvited. He dried his hands and made his way to the dining hall, where the other monks had already gathered for the morning meal. As he entered, he noticed subtle glances, some admiring after the demonstration in the courtyard, others showing mild disapproval at his tardiness. A combination of rice portions, fermented vegetables, and tea was arranged on the single long table. The young monk took the only available seat, beside a visiting monk from another monastery. This visitor, known for his vast knowledge of ancient texts as well as his demanding temperament, turned to him immediately. "You're the one who spent the entire morning sweeping the courtyard, aren't you?" he asked, his voice carrying a faint note of disdain. Turning simple tasks into grand spiritual displays seems more like a show of ego than true practice. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Some monks lowered their gazes to their bowls, while others watched discreetly, curious about the response to come. Such direct criticism was rare in the monastery, where harmony was highly valued. The young monk felt the impact of the words like waves crashing against the shore. First came surprise, then a wave of heat rising up his neck, the first stirrings of anger. Next, the tightening in his chest, the wounded pride seeking to defend itself. These sensations coursed through his body like lightning flashing in the night sky. But instead of reacting automatically, he maintained the awareness he had cultivated in the courtyard. He took a deep breath, noticing the cool air entering his nostrils, filling his lungs, and then leaving gently. He observed how the emotions arose, intensified, and began to subside, just as waves inevitably lose their strength when they reach the shore. "You may be right," he finally replied with a gentle smile. "I appreciate your observation. It gives me something to contemplate." The visiting monk blinked, clearly surprised by the unexpected response. He had prepared arguments for a confrontation that never came. Like a warrior ready for battle, only to find himself standing before an empty field, he was momentarily disoriented. The meal continued in silence, but now with a different quality. It was no longer the tension of potential hostility, but the quiet of newfound respect. The visiting monk observed the young monk discreetly, watching as he continued his meal with the same mindfulness he had shown while sweeping, each spoonful a complete experience, each sip of tea fully savored. After the meal, as the monks moved on to their afternoon tasks, a novice approached the young monk, curiosity overcoming his shyness. "How did you manage not to be upset by those harsh words?" "I would have felt anger, shame. I probably would have responded defensively or held on to resentment." The young monk invited the novice to walk with him to the edge of the small lake that adorned the monastery's grounds. The crystal-clear surface perfectly reflected the blue sky and drifting clouds. "Look at this lake," he said, pointing to the still water. "Now, watch what happens." He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. Concentric ripples spread from the point of impact, disturbing the smooth surface, distorting the reflection of the sky. Harsh words are like this stone. When they hit the mind, they create waves of emotion, anger, shame, the urge to defend oneself. These are natural reactions, just as it is natural for water to be disturbed when something disrupts it. He paused, watching as the ripples gradually faded and the surface returned to its placid state, the perfect reflection restored. But notice, the nature of the water hasn't changed. It was momentarily disturbed, but soon returned to its natural state of calm. In the same way, the basic nature of our consciousness is clear and tranquil. Emotions arise and pass, like waves, but we don't have to become the waves. The novice frowned, processing the words. But how? When someone criticizes me, anger seems to take over my whole being. I don't feel separate from it. It's because we identify with our thoughts and emotions, the young monk explained. We say, "I am angry," as if anger is what we are. But what if you said, "I am observing anger arise"? That small shift in perspective creates space. You are not the anger. You are the awareness that can observe the anger. They continued walking around the lake, now completely calm again. The Dhammapada teaches us, you are not disturbed by criticism if you have no desire for praise. For years, I meditated on these words, realizing that the desire for praise and the fear of criticism are two sides of the same coin attachment to the opinions of others. A duck landed gently on the lake's surface, creating small ripples. When the visiting monk criticized me, I could feel the reaction beginning, the heat of anger, the contraction of wounded pride. I didn't try to suppress these sensations. I simply observed them with curiosity, just as we are observing this duck now. So this is how anger manifests in the body. Interesting how the chest tightens, how the breath changes. The novice seemed fascinated. And did that make the anger disappear? Not immediately, but by not identifying with it, by not feeding it with more thoughts like, how dare he criticize me? Or, I need to prove I'm right. The emotion lost its fuel. Like a fire without wood, it gradually burned out on its own. They reached a stone bench and sat down. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the trees, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow on the ground. This practice is called vipassana, seeing clearly. It's not about having no emotions, but about seeing them with clarity, without being overwhelmed by them. It's like sitting atop a mountain, watching a storm unfold in the valley below. The storm is real, powerful, but you are not lost within it. The novice remained silent for a long moment, absorbing the teaching. Finally, he asked, "This observer state, do you maintain it all the time?" The young monk smiled. "No, not yet. There are moments when I get caught in the waves, forgetting that I am the lake. That's why we call it practice. Every time we remember to observe, even if it's after being swept away for a while, we strengthen this muscle of awareness." On the other side of the lake, they saw the visiting monk slowly approaching. His steps were hesitant, his face a mixture of determination and discomfort. "It seems we will have another opportunity to practice," the young monk said with a slight smile, rising to meet the approaching visitor. The novice watched with growing admiration as the young monk walked toward the man who had harshly criticized him. Without any sign of resentment or discomfort, only a genuine openness to whatever might come next. There was something in him that the novice was beginning to understand, the ability to meet each moment with freshness, free from the weight of past wounds or future anxieties. The visiting monk approached with measured steps, his face no longer bearing the same hardness as before. When he came close enough, he offered a subtle bow, a gesture rarely given to someone younger. "I apologize for my rudeness during the meal," he said, the words leaving him with visible effort. "I observed you throughout the afternoon, the way you interact with others, and I realized I judged too hastily." The young monk returned the bow, deeper this time. "There is no need for apologies. Your words gave me a valuable opportunity for practice." Something in the simplicity of this response touched the visitor. After a brief conversation, they went their separate ways, yet something had changed between them. An invisible bridge of mutual respect had been built. As evening approached, the monks gathered to receive instructions for the following day. The master announced unexpected news. The monastery would be facing a severe water shortage. The dry season had arrived earlier and with greater intensity than usual. The clouds that typically brought light rains at this time of year had been absent from the sky for weeks. "Starting tomorrow," the master explained, "each monk will receive a limited amount of water daily to care for a section of the communal garden. Our survival in the coming months will depend on the wisdom with which we use this precious resource." The communal garden was not just a source of physical nourishment, but also a space for spiritual practice. Tending to plants meant cultivating patience, care, and reverence for the interdependence of all beings. Under normal circumstances, water from the nearby stream was abundant, and the garden flourished with little effort. The drought posed an unprecedented challenge. The following morning, each monk was given a small barrel with their daily water allotment. The master assigned areas of responsibility, dividing the vast garden into equal sections. The young monk was given a central area where root vegetables and delicate leafy greens grew, plants particularly sensitive to water scarcity. The first few days were filled with enthusiasm. The monks experimented with different techniques, shared theories on the best time to water, and discussed methods to maximize the efficiency of each precious drop. Some devised elaborate irrigation systems, digging small channels and constructing miniature reservoirs. As he observed, the young monk noticed different approaches emerging. Some monks poured nearly all their water on the first day, believing that an initial deep soak would strengthen the plants for the days ahead. Others used complex systems that, while ingenious, wasted water through leaks and evaporation. He chose a different path. He divided his barrel into 3 equal parts. The first portion was used in the morning, just after the dew had evaporated, when the soil still retained some moisture from the night. The second was applied in the mid-afternoon, when the sun was at its peak and the plants were most stressed. The third was reserved for early evening, allowing the water to seep deep into the soil during the cooler hours. More importantly, he maintained this routine with unwavering consistency. No more, no less water than planned. No more, no less attention than each plant required. Day after day, his approach remained the same: methodical, attentive, and balanced. After 2 weeks, the communal garden told a revealing story. Some sections displayed wilted plants and parched soil. These belonged to those who had used all their water in the first days in a burst of impulsive enthusiasm. Other areas showed irregular growth, with some plants thriving while others withered. These belonged to monks who alternated between periods of intense dedication and stretches of neglect, when other duties or distractions consumed their energy. At the garden's center, however, the young monk's section stood in vibrant green, an impressive contrast to the surrounding areas. His plants grew evenly, neither excessively lush nor underdeveloped. The soil maintained an ideal moisture level, neither waterlogged nor dry. It was as if that small patch of earth had found its own microclimate amidst the relentless drought. The monks began to take notice. One by one, they approached to observe the technique that yielded such remarkable results. Some suspected that the young monk was receiving extra water, but the master, who personally oversaw the distribution, knew that was not the case. One day, as the young monk applied his afternoon portion of water, a group gathered around him. Among them stood an elder, his hands wrinkled and his back curved from years of working the land. Respected for his deep knowledge of plants and natural cycles, he rarely spoke, preferring contemplative silence over verbal instruction. "What do you do differently, young one?" the elder asked, his voice rough from disuse. "We all receive the same amount of water, yet your results are superior." The young monk finished watering the last plant before responding, dedicating his full attention to the task before turning to the group. "It's nothing special," he replied with genuine simplicity. "I simply follow the middle way." The elder smiled, recognizing the reference to the Buddha's fundamental teaching, but the younger monks looked puzzled. "The middle way? That's a teaching about detachment and avoiding spiritual extremes. What does that have to do with gardening?" one of them asked. The young monk crouched down and scooped up a handful of soil, letting it trickle slowly through his fingers. "When I first started practicing the Dharma, I mistook intensity for commitment. I meditated for hours until my knees swelled and my mind became exhausted, only to then abandon practice for days when my enthusiasm faded. I fasted until I nearly fainted, only to later overeat when hunger became unbearable." He gazed toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning its descent. "One day, my master told me about a teaching the Buddha once gave to a musician disciple. This disciple played a stringed instrument and asked how he should practice the Dharma. The Buddha asked, "When the strings of your instrument are too tight, what happens?" The disciple replied that they produce a harsh sound and may snap. "And when they are too loose," the Buddha continued, "they produce no sound at all," the musician answered. In the same way, the Buddha concluded, spiritual practice requires balanced tension, neither too much effort nor too much relaxation. The young monk gestured toward his plants. "I apply the same principle here. Neither too much water at once, which would wash away nutrients and rot the roots, nor too little, which would cause the plants to wither. Neither excessive attention, obsessively checking every leaf multiple times a day, nor neglect, forgetting them for long stretches. Just the right amount of water and care, applied consistently, day after day." The elder nodded slowly, his eyes gleaming with recognition. "The river that carves the deepest canyon is not the most forceful, but the most constant," he said, quoting an old proverb. One of the younger monks, known for his cycles of intense zeal followed by complete inactivity, seemed troubled. "But consistency is so monotonous. Where is the inspiration? The enthusiasm?" The young monk smiled gently. "True inspiration does not come from fleeting emotions, but from a deep commitment that persists even when feelings change. As for enthusiasm," he gestured to his thriving plants, "I find more joy in these sustainable results than in any fleeting burst of energy." By now, the sun touched the horizon, bathing the garden in golden light. The shadows stretched long, and the oppressive heat of the day began to fade. In that soft glow, the contrast between the young monk's section and the surrounding areas became even more striking. "There's one more thing I've learned," the young monk added, rising to his feet and dusting off his hands. "Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. These plants do not grow faster simply because I wish them to. They follow their own rhythm, and my role is simply to create the conditions that support that natural pace." As the group dispersed, reflecting on what they had learned, the young monk gathered his empty watering can. Tomorrow would bring the same challenge, the same limited amount of water, the same relentless sun, the same thirsty plants. And he would be there, just as he was today, just as he would be the next day, practicing the middle way not as an abstract concept, but as a living practice. As he walked back to the monastery, he saw a solitary figure sitting beneath a tree in the distance. As he approached, he recognized one of the elder monks, his face marked not only by time but by an expression of deep sorrow. As the young monk approached, he began to notice more subtle details about the figure sitting beneath the tree. The elderly monk held his shoulders slumped and his head bowed, as if carrying an invisible weight. In his wrinkled hands, he clutched a crumpled letter. Silent tears fell onto the paper, forming small stains that spread like water flowers. The young monk hesitated. Interrupting such a private moment of grief felt like an intrusion, yet ignoring a brother's suffering went against everything he had learned about the path of the Dharma. He chose a quiet approach, sitting a short distance away, offering his presence without imposing. The elderly monk looked up, startled to realize he was no longer alone. He quickly tried to hide the letter and wipe his tears, but the sudden movement only emphasized the fragility of the moment. "Forgive me," the young monk said softly. "I did not mean to intrude. I can leave if you prefer to be alone." The old monk studied the young one's face for a long moment, as if assessing something important. Then, with a deep sigh, he relaxed slightly. "Solitude has not been good company this afternoon," he replied, his trembling voice revealing a sorrow rarely expressed within the disciplined halls of the monastery. "Perhaps your presence is kinder." They remained silent for a time, only the whisper of leaves above and the occasional call of a distant bird filling the air between them. It was not an uncomfortable silence, but a space of respect, allowing the grief to breathe without the pressure of immediate words. Finally, The elderly monk extended the crumpled letter. "My younger brother," he explained. "The only family I have left in the outside world. He passed away last night, peacefully in his sleep, they say. I have not seen him in 15 years, since I entered the monastery." Oh. The young monk received the letter with both hands, a gesture of reverence for the emotional weight it carried, even without reading its contents. "I am so sorry for your loss," he said. Simple words, but spoken with sincerity. 15 years, the old monk repeated, as if trying to grasp the magnitude of such time. "I chose the spiritual path, the pursuit of detachment and liberation from suffering. And yet, here I am, grieving like any ordinary man for someone I barely saw in the past decades." There was a note of bitter self-criticism in his voice, a harsh judgment upon his own emotional reaction. So many years of meditation, of studying the sutras, of practicing non-attachment. For what? In the end, pain finds me just the same. A young monk contemplated these words, sensing the deep spiritual crisis they revealed. Many practitioners face this crucial moment, the confrontation between spiritual ideals and the inescapable reality of human experience. "May I share a perspective?" he asked gently. The elderly monk gestured in consent, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sun now descended, painting the sky in deep hues of orange and red. "When I first began walking the path of the Dharma, I also mistook non-attachment for not feeling. I believed the goal was to eliminate all emotions, especially painful ones like sadness, fear, or anger. I meditated, trying to create a state of absolute imperturbability, a fortress against suffering." The young monk picked up a fallen leaf, examining its intricate patterns. "One day, during a long meditation, I had a realization that changed everything. I saw that I had been practicing a subtle form of aversion, trying to push away entire parts of the human experience. And I realized that this was not liberation, but another form of imprisonment." He returned the letter to the elderly monk, who now received it with steadier hands. The Buddhist teachings on non-attachment do not mean not feeling or not caring. They mean not clinging, not completely identifying with the experience. Your tears for your brother are not a spiritual failure. They are an expression of your humanity, of your capacity for connection. The elderly monk considered these words, a small shift in his expression suggesting that something within him resonated. "There is a story about the Buddha that has always deeply moved me," the young monk continued. When his cousin and longtime attendant, Ananda, was nearing death, a disciple asked the Buddha if he, being fully enlightened, would feel sadness. The Buddha replied that yes, he would feel sadness, but without suffering. He explained that he would feel the sadness completely, but he would not identify with it, not resist it, not turn it into prolonged suffering through attachment. The soft evening breeze began to blow, carrying the fragrance of night-blooming flowers from the monastery gardens. Perhaps true non-attachment is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to feel everything fully, allowing each experience to come and go like clouds in the sky. The elderly monk ran his fingers over the letter, now with a gentler touch, almost a caress. "You know," he said after a moment, "my brother always said I was overly rigid, even when we were children. You think you can control life by being strict with yourself," he used to say. Perhaps, even in the end, he's still teaching me. A fragile but genuine smile appeared on his wrinkled face. "Tomorrow begins the annual silence retreat," the old monk mentioned. "A week alone in the forest cabin. I must admit, I was dreading the isolation, especially now." The young monk felt an impulse arise within him, an idea that seemed to come not just from his mind, but from a deeper place. "Allow me to share a practice that has been particularly meaningful to me. It is called Metta Bhavana, the meditation of loving kindness. Perhaps it could be of help during your retreat." Over the next few minutes, he explained the ancient practice of cultivating loving kindness, first for oneself, then gradually expanding to include loved ones, neutral people, difficult individuals, and finally, all beings. To someone in mourning, this practice offered a way to transform the pain of loss into the strength of connection. During my own silent retreat last year, I used this practice extensively, the young monk shared. In the first few days, I felt deeply lonely in the isolated cabin. But as I cultivated these feelings of loving kindness and connection, a transformation occurred. The physical space of the cabin remained the same, but the inner space of the mind expanded infinitely. As darkness deepened and the first stars appeared in the sky, the two monks rose to return to the monastery. Something had changed in the elder's posture, not a miraculous erasure of pain, but perhaps a new relationship with it, a new context for understanding. "Thank you," he said simply, sparse words but significant from a man known for his reserved nature. They walked side by side toward the monastery lights, now shining in the distance like beacons in the growing night. The young monk felt a deep gratitude for the opportunity to share, to connect, to serve in some small way the suffering of another being. The next morning, the monastery was immersed in preparations for the annual silence retreat. An ancient tradition required each monk to spend 7 days in complete solitude, dwelling in small cabins scattered throughout the surrounding forest. It was a period some feared, others eagerly anticipated an inevitable encounter with oneself, without the distractions of communal life. As he gathered the few belongings allowed during the retreat, a mat, a bowl, an extra robe for the cold nights, the young monk reflected on the conversation from the night before. Hans, the elderly monk's suffering had touched something deep within him, a visceral understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings. Despite years of practice and study, it was this simple encounter beneath the tree that revealed a truth the sutras only pointed to. True strength does not come from isolation, but from compassionate connection. Dawn arrived with a gentle chime of a bell, announcing the beginning of the annual silent retreat. The monks, gathered in the central courtyard with their few belongings, received final instructions from the master. Then, in silent procession, they walked toward the forest, where simple huts awaited them for the next 7 days. The young monk's designated hut was near a small stream, whose constant murmur would be his only audible companion during the week of seclusion. The interior space was austere, just enough room to sit, lie down, and take shelter from the elements. A small window allowed natural light to enter during the day, and an oil lamp provided minimal illumination for the nighttime hours. After arranging his scarce belongings, the young monk sat on the straw mat at the center of the hut and closed his eyes, allowing his mind to acclimate to the silence. The first moments of stillness often revealed just how noisy the mind could be when deprived of external stimuli. The first 3 days of the retreat flowed in a quiet rhythm, alternating between seated meditation, mindful walking around the small perimeter of his hut, and the practice of metta bhavana he had shared with the elder monk. The young monk felt a deepening tranquility. Each morning, a designated novice left a bowl of rice and vegetables near the hut's door, along with a jug of fresh water, his only, albeit indirect, interaction with another human being. On the 4th night, however, a dramatic shift occurred. The sky, which had been clear throughout the retreat, began to gather dark, heavy clouds. The wind grew stronger, making the forest trees groan and bend. The young monk, meditating by the light of the small oil lamp, opened his eyes as he sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure. The storm erupted with surprising ferocity. Lightning slashed through the sky at ever shorter intervals, followed by thunder that shook the tiny hut to its foundations. The rain began not as a gentle prelude, but as a relentless curtain of water pouring mercilessly over the forest. Through the small window, the young monk observed the fury of the elements. There was a wild beauty in this spectacle, a demonstration of nature's power and unpredictability. For hours, The storm maintained its intensity, the wind howling through the trees and water quickly pooling on the saturated ground. Around midnight, a different sound caught his attention. The stream nearby, usually a gentle whisper, had turned into a menacing roar. Grabbing the oil lamp, the young monk opened the hut's door and was met with an alarming sight. The stream had overflowed its banks, and water was already reaching the base of the small hill where his hut was situated. As he watched, trying to assess the danger, a deafening crash filled the air. A landslide had been triggered by the relentless rain. A mass of mud, rocks, and uprooted trees tumbled down the mountainside, its path set directly toward him. There was no time to gather belongings. With only the clothes on his back, the young monk fled the hut, running for higher ground. Looking back, he witnessed the moment the avalanche of mud engulfed his small dwelling, swallowing it completely in a matter of seconds. The combined force of water and earth was relentless, utterly transforming the familiar landscape. As the night wore on, the storm gradually waned. The rain eased from a torrential downpour to a steady fall, then to a light drizzle. The young monk found shelter beneath a rocky outcrop, offering minimal protection from the elements. Soaked to the bone, shivering from the cold, he remained alert, aware that further landslides were still possible. When the first light of morning finally appeared, pale and hesitant between dispersing clouds, he could assess the extent of the devastation. The small clearing where his hut had stood was now unrecognizable, a sea of mud, rocks, and twisted tree trunks. Not only his hut, but 3 others nearby had been completely destroyed. Carefully descending the muddy slope, he searched for signs of the other monks who had occupied the huts. To his relief, he found fresh footprints indicating that they too had escaped in time. Following an improvised path through the debris, he made his way toward the main monastery, where he suspected others had gathered for refuge. Upon reaching the monastery, he found a scene of intense activity: monks gathering supplies, organizing search efforts, and tending to those who had returned, drenched and exhausted. He was met with expressions of relief. After confirming he was physically unharmed, he was led to the dining hall, where a warm meal and dry clothes awaited him. As he warmed himself with a bowl of steaming soup, he noticed the elderly monk he had spoken with before the retreat. The man seemed to have aged a decade in just 4 days, his face marked by deep lines of worry and exhaustion. Approaching him, the young monk discovered why. The elder's hut had been one of the first to be hit by the flood, and he had lost not only his temporary shelter, but also a letter from his late brother, the last tangible connection to his family. "It's all gone," the elder said, his voice hollow. The waters took even his final words. The young monk sat beside him, offering silent presence before speaking. "When I was 16, my master gifted me a string of beads that had belonged to his own teacher. It was my most treasured possession, not for its material value, but for the spiritual significance and lineage it represented." The elder looked at him, curiosity momentarily replacing the sorrow in his eyes. A year later, while meditating by a lake, the cord broke. The beads fell into the water and sank before I could react. I was devastated. I spent days diving, trying to recover them, refusing to accept the loss. The young monk took a sip of the warm soup before continuing. "My master, seeing my suffering, sat with me by that same lake." He pointed to the surface, where the sun created dancing patterns of light. "What do you see?" he asked. "Water, reflections," I replied. "Are they permanent?" he questioned. "No, they change constantly," I admitted. "And yet, are they any less real or less beautiful for being impermanent?" he observed. The elder was listening intently now, something stirring in his gaze. "The Buddha taught us about anicca, the impermanence of all things," the young monk continued. "Not as an abstract philosophical concept, but as a lived truth. In the Diamond Sutra, he asks, how could we cling to something that is like lightning in the sky, a falling star, a bubble in a river, or an illusion. A ray of sunlight entered through the dining hall window, illuminating the table between them. Your brother's letter, the words on the paper, were merely a vessel for something deeper. The true gift of your brother was the feelings those words awakened in you, the connection they rekindled. And that, no flood can take away. The elder took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. To resist impermanence is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. Accepting impermanence does not mean giving up or not caring. It means recognizing the true nature of things, and in that recognition, finding a deeper freedom. Outside, the sun now shone fully, beginning to dry the waterlogged earth. The sound of hammers and saws could already be heard. The younger monks had begun the work of repair and reconstruction. The monastery master entered the dining hall and announced that, given the exceptional circumstances, the silent retreat was officially ended. The coming days would be dedicated to clearing the damage, rebuilding what was possible, and reorganizing what had been transformed by the force of nature. As the monks dispersed to their assigned tasks, the young monk saw an opportunity to turn this catastrophe into a living teaching. Instead of mourning what had been lost, he began envisioning possibilities, smarter adaptations to the terrain, more resilient structures for future storms. In the weeks following the storm, the monastery pulsed with renewed energy. Rather than breaking the community's spirit, the disaster had catalyzed a wave of cooperation and creativity. The destroyed huts were being rebuilt, not as exact replicas of the old ones, but with structural improvements that would make them more resilient to future storms. Drainage systems were being installed to redirect water away from inhabited areas. The stream itself was being gently redirected with natural barriers of stone and wood. The young monk had naturally taken on a central role in these efforts. His ability to envision practical solutions, combined with his calm nature and attentive presence, inspired confidence in both the elder monks and the novices. Without seeking authority, it had flowed toward him like water finding its natural level. One afternoon, while overseeing the construction of a new meditation hut, a young monk was surprised by the arrival of the monastery's headmaster. Rarely seen outside the central temple, the master was an almost legendary figure, respected not only for his deep wisdom, but for the genuine compassion that radiated from his presence. "Your work here is admirable," the master observed, surveying the progress. "You have a gift for inspiring others and for seeing possibilities where many see only destruction." The young monk bowed respectfully. "I only try to apply the teachings as best as I can." The master smiled. "That is precisely why I came to speak with you. I would like to offer you a position as my personal assistant." A murmur of astonishment spread among the monks working nearby, who had overheard the offer. It was an honor rarely granted, especially to someone so young. It was an honor rarely granted, especially to someone so young. The position would grant you access to advanced teachings, rare texts, and the opportunity to deepen your practice under direct guidance. The master continued. "You have demonstrated the necessary qualities: mindfulness, equanimity, discipline, and compassion. Your insights into impermanence, in particular, reveal an understanding that goes beyond mere intellectual concepts." The young monk felt a wave of gratitude for this unexpected recognition. A part of him responded with genuine enthusiasm to the idea of advanced studies and deeper practices. After all, it was the kind of opportunity many practitioners only dreamed of. "You do not need to answer immediately," the master added, sensing his hesitation. "Reflect on the offer for a few days. We will speak again at the next full moon." That night, as he meditated in his temporary hut, the young monk contemplated the master's offer. There was honor, learning, and spiritual growth. There was also relative comfort and prestige within the monastic community. Why then? Did he feel this unease, as if something was not completely aligned? In the days that followed, he continued his usual activities, but the question lingered as a constant undercurrent in his awareness. The answer began to take shape not through intellectual deliberation, but through small moments of clarity that arose when he least expected them. One afternoon, while walking through the nearby village to fetch supplies, he passed by the small local prison. It was a bleak structure, with thick walls and narrow windows that barely allowed any light inside. From within, he could hear occasional voices, some shouting in anger, others murmuring in despair. He stopped, observing the building for a long moment. Something about this place of contained suffering struck a deep chord within him. On his way back to the monastery, he encountered an elderly farmer whose face was decades of toil under the relentless sun. The man spoke of persistent pain that tormented him, making every movement an act of endurance. "I've tried every remedy we know around here," the farmer explained, "but the pain only gets worse. I've heard that your monastery has meditation techniques that can help with physical suffering." The young monk shared a few simple mindfulness techniques that might offer some relief, but as he spoke, he realized how limited this brief encounter was. The man needed ongoing instruction, guidance, someone to help him navigate the inevitable obstacles in his practice. On the night of the full moon, the young monk walked to the central temple where the master awaited him. The silver light bathed the stone courtyards, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. "Have you considered my offer?" the master asked as they sat before the Buddha statue. "Yes, master, and I am deeply grateful for it," the young monk replied. "However, I must ask your permission to follow a different path." The master inclined his head, inviting him to continue. "During these weeks of reflection, I have realized that my heart moves in a specific direction. I wish to teach meditation and mindfulness practices beyond the monastery walls in the village prison, to farmers suffering from chronic pain, to anyone who is suffering and has no access to the teachings we are privileged to practice here." A brief silence followed his words. The young monk continued, his voice gaining firmness as he articulated the vision that had crystallized in his heart. "I recalled the story of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, who vowed not to enter nirvana until all sentient beings were free from suffering. Though I am far from such realization, I feel that my path at this moment is to bring these practices where suffering is greatest, not to remain where there is already so much light." The master studied him for a long moment, his gaze penetrating yet kind. Then, to the young monk's surprise, a smile illuminated his aged face. "I expected this answer," he said softly. "Or perhaps, more precisely, I hoped you would listen to your true nature, not to what others, including myself, might consider the right or prestigious path." The master rose and walked to a small table where a scroll lay carefully rolled up. He unfurled it, revealing beautiful calligraphy and ancient Buddhist text. "Let me share with you a parable the Buddha once told," the master said. "A man, needing to cross a dangerous river, built a raft with great effort and safely reached the other shore. But then, instead of leaving it behind for others to use or simply abandoning it as unnecessary, he lifted it onto his back and carried it for the rest of his journey, turning what had been a tool of liberation into an unnecessary burden." The master rolled up the scroll with reverence. Many of us, even with the best intentions, end up carrying the raft. We accumulate knowledge, techniques, titles, positions, forgetting that they are only means to a greater end, not the end itself. Stepping closer, he placed a hand on the young monk's shoulder. "You have understood something that many search for their entire lives. True success is not in rising to positions of prestige, but in aligning our actions with our deepest values. You do not carry the weight of ego or status, and for that, you are truly free to follow your dharma, your rightful purpose." In the weeks that followed, with the master's blessing, the young monk began preparing for his new mission. He studied specific texts to help him adapt practices for people in challenging circumstances. He met regularly with the monastery's physician to learn more about the intersection of meditation and physical suffering. When the day of his departure finally arrived, a small ceremony was held. The monks he had worked, meditated, and lived with gathered to offer their blessings. The elderly monk who had lost his brother approached with a simple package. "A gift for your journey," he said, handing over the carefully wrapped bundle. Inside was a handcrafted notebook, its pages made of delicate rice paper. On the first page, written in meticulous calligraphy, was a message. To remember that true practice is not in seeking personal peace, but in being a conduit of peace for all beings. May each page of this book record not only your teachings, but the transformations you witness in others. The next morning, as the sun rose behind the distant mountains, the young monk set off with only the essentials, his robes, an alms bowl, the gifted notebook, and the wisdom cultivated through years of diligent practice. Not as one leaving home, but as one expanding the very notion of home to include all places where suffering could be alleviated.